Well, good morning. It's really good to see you. If you're gathered with us online, really glad to have you in the room. And if you're new to church or you're new here, I just invite you to connect using that connection card the way Reed described, because that is going to help us take our next steps collectively as a church. And I want to start today, as we keep going with the series that we're in, I want to start today by talking and asking you a question. Do you know the joy of experiencing a new car or a new to you car? You know the joy I'm talking about. There's a smell, a new car smell. They've tried to package it. It's wonderful. It smells good. It's detailed. It's clean when you get a new car or a new to you car. And man, if you've been driving something else, when you get into a new car and you experience those fresh brakes, that's like, oh my goodness, this thing stops on a dime. I should probably get my brakes looked at, right? That reality, there is just so much joy when it comes with purchasing a new car. Well, my wife and I, back at the end of December, early January, we purchased a minivan. It was our first ever minivan, and it's because we have 4 children, and apparently it's a good idea if you bring all your kids with you places. So we needed a vehicle big enough to do that, so we bought this new to us, not a brand new, but a new to us minivan. And it was a neat experience, and it has all the new car features. Well, recently, within the last couple of weeks, we took our whole family camping, all 4 kids. And so, I see some of the grimaces. If you're online, I'm sure you're grimacing. So the reality is we had this new car, and yet we took it on this trip. It was the longest trip we'd ever taken it on with our kids. And as I'm driving, I can slowly smell the new car smell going away, being replaced with the scent of old Cheerios and chicken nuggets. The kids are dropping their drinks places. And somebody left. We went fishing while we were camping, and one of the kids left their bait on the hook. Luckily, it was frying in the sun, so that was awesome. But I'm just like, I'm looking at this trip and realizing I had a brand new car. What I have is different now. And I'm thinking like I probably lost $5,000 on the resale value of my car in that one trip. And I'm low-level concerned that I'll have to fill out a Carfax on that trip. And I think what's most frustrating to me about the whole thing is it's the nature of things, but I grew up in a generation of kids who watched our parents with minivans and said, that will never be me. That will never be me. I'll get a big truck, I'll buy an SUV, we'll get a train. I don't care. But we're not getting a minivan. Well, we ended up 2 decades later buying a minivan. That's the way that went down. And I bought it for my kids because I love my kids, but they seem to be actively ruining it. And they just don't understand. And as maybe parents out there, you all can relate to buying your kids something that you think is special only to have them ruin it and fight over it. This wasn't the first time that I'd watched an investment in my life begin to plummet, because I also invest in retirement. And I invest in this retirement. I invest in through a company called Betterment. And when March, the pandemic hit, and you saw the stock market react the way it did, this Betterment, it has a sweet, sweet app. And what that means is that in real time, I can watch myself lose money, which is the most infuriating thing. And it's stressful and it's frustrating. And it has this retirement projector. So you can kind of see like, hey, this is how much you'll have at retirement. Oh, hey, this is how far off retirement is. And it's just frustrating too, because you're watching, it's like, retirement's getting further and further away. Also, I'm having less and less money. It's like, that's frustrating. And it's all in the future. And this is what I'm stressed about it. I'm looking at that number and what I thought, it's like, oh, that'll be enough to retire on. It's probably going to be enough for me to like retire in a cardboard box. And maybe a deluxe cardboard box. But it's stressful for me. And I got frustrated watching it just constantly go away and decline. And yet I don't know what it is. It's like I'm frustrated and stressed and mad and angry. And yet I can't stop watching. I can't stop looking. I can't stop getting on. And I just stopped contributing to it right now for this season because it's just going away. I ask you a question that I've asked myself, especially in this season. Why is it that money influences our emotions so much? Why is it that money influences our emotions so much? There seems to be a complex relationship between our hearts and money. There just is. And for the sake of my peace, for the sake of my kids, for the sake of the peace of us, I want us to understand it. I want to understand it. And I think when it comes to this question, Jesus has some profound insight to share on the matter. Now, when I say that, I know everyone's views, thought processes of Jesus are a little bit different. You may be not convinced about who he is, or he's not who he says he is, you may be thinking, or you don't believe what the eyewitnesses said about him coming back from the dead. And right now, that's fine. All I mean to say is when we talk about this question, I think Jesus teaches something completely insightful and true to life. And I want us to explore that together. So that's my heart. We're continuing with the series, Summer on the Mount, where we look at how Jesus flips everything on its head. And all our messages are coming from his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. And today, together, I want us to explore the relationship that money has with our hearts. And as I see it, when I look at the text that when I look at the message that Jesus shares here, I think he shares three realities. And as we get into the text, that's what I want to pull out for us. So here we go. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19. The scriptures are going to be up there. You're welcome to follow along on your device or your Bible if you've got it, whatever you've got. But let's just roll through it together. Here's what Jesus starts off by saying. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. That means, and kind of quite literally what Jesus is talking about here, a lot of commentators think that he's making a play on words, almost like, don't treasure your treasures. Don't make a habit of treasuring your treasures. And so he says this, but he also says, do not store up for yourselves. Let's think of our audience for a moment. This is something our audience was very familiar with at the time. Wealth was more commonly measured by crops, clothes, cattle, the size of your barn, which is not a measurement I use. It's like, how wealthy are you? Well, I got a pretty big barn. No, I don't. It's different for us today, but back then that was the audience, and they were an agricultural society. So they're used to storing up stuff. In fact, it's good. You might need to store up and invest in case there's a bad harvest that comes your way. They also grew up with proverbs that talked about how good it was to store up. Be like the ant, store up provisions. The wise person stores up choice wine and oils. So storing up was not a bad thing in their culture. And if you had a lot, the thought process with those people, if you had a lot, people would look at you and think, oh man, God must be really pleased with them. They must have the favor of God. He must like them and maybe even love them a little bit more. And that's what they thought. So when Jesus says, don't store up, it absolutely, I think, clashes with their mindsets. And I think it clashes with ours too. So Jesus says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. And then he tells them why. Where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal. Don't store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moths and vermin could be like rodents or insects, that sort of thing. Some translations say rust. It's just where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal. And I think in here is where Jesus lays out the first reality of money. It's one that we're going to see together. The first reality of money is that money is temporary. Money's temporary. Case in point, you don't see hearses pulling U-Hauls. It's just not something you do. In fact, one of the richest men, I think the richest man to ever live, a guy named John D. Rockefeller, which over 100 years ago, he was like this giant oil tycoon, titan of industry. And people are like, that was back then, now people are richer. Actually, his wealth back then was estimated, if it were put today, $418 billion, 2% of US GDP, twice as rich as Amazon's Jeff Bezos, if we put it. So the dude knew money. And it was said after the day he died, a journalist went to John D. Rockefeller's personal accountant and said, hey, how much did John D. leave behind? And the personal account, without skipping a beat, said, all of it. All of it. Money's temporary. I think what Jesus is trying to wake us up is this reality that it's temporary. Why would we put our trust in something so finicky, something so uncertain, something so finite? And why would we invest all that we have here in light of that? It's temporary. When we look at what Jesus says, and also when we look at what the eyewitnesses that write in the New Testament, what Jesus said and what he taught, one of the things they communicate is that we are eternal. We have an eternal soul. Everybody lives forever someplace. That reality is true. That means that the time that you're allotted as you walk the planet, I don't know how many years you got, but it's finite, it's fixed. But knowing that compared to everything, it's a blip. Jesus saying, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. It's just a little bit. It's temporary. Think of something bigger. Why would we invest so much in something that's so finite? It's a blip of existence. Almost all the time, what we define as treasure is temporary. It's short-term treasure. And it's Jesus that wants to wake us up, to take off, remove, and unlock those shackles and restore security to our hearts. That's why he's flipping everything on its head. Money is temporary. And that's why Jesus, I think this great flip that Jesus makes here is that everything we're told will satisfy, Jesus said, will ultimately disappoint. Everything we're told will satisfy, Jesus said, will disappoint, will ultimately disappoint. Because everything that you go after and could pursue on the planet Earth, all forms of wealth, they can be broken, they can be destroyed, they can be stolen, they can be corroded, they can be eaten, or you can have it till the moment you die, but you can't take it with you. At some point, someone will get it, and it won't be you. It's just temporary. Everything we're told will satisfy, Jesus said, will ultimately disappoint. That's why he says this. Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. And again, we're going to keep moving with all this because I think Jesus has a lot to say, but we're going to come back to this. I promise we'll come back to this. I want to talk to you about potentially how to do this at the very end. And then Jesus keeps moving. Here's what he says. And he says something, man, this next thing is so insightful, it's so profound, and I think it's really true to life. And when I pause and think about it, it's like, it can be convicting. But it's hopeful too. He says this in Matthew 6:21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This is profound. Jesus cuts right to the heart of the matter. This is a be honest moment. This is a look in the mirror moment. This is a not what you thought you spent your money on, but where did it actually go? And that will reveal the location of your heart. Not where you want it to be, not where you think it is, not where you think it should be, but where it is. That can be uncomfortable. And this is, I think, another reality of money. Whether we like it or not, money maps our hearts. Money maps our hearts. If you want to find out what you really value, follow the money. Follow the money. Your budget is a great revealer of what your treasure is, and what you treasure, what you value above and beyond all other things will really drive you and will really influence you. Money maps your heart. As I look in my life, because I want to be like candid with you, when I look in my life, I think about those things. If I follow the money, if money really does map my heart, I want to know, like, how is that true to life in my own life? Well, here's the thing. My wife and I, when we do our monthly budget, we give ourselves an allowance. And just that's money that we're able to spend, and we can just spend it on the things that we want. It's not committed to bills. It's just she gets some and I get some, and we just get to like spend it. You know what I mean? Like whatever we want to do. Coffee, all that kind of stuff. Well, the thing is, if I have like a weakness, I think sometimes it's I'll go to Target. And if I go to Target for anything, I could be going for deodorant or coffee or a birthday card, I always beeline through the discount rack of shirts. In fact, I got this. This is a shirt that I bought before I knew that I was going to use this in the message. And so Eileen was like, is that a new shirt? Is that a new shirt? And I said, you bet it is. So, but I mean, if you were to look at my budget, what I spend my money on, you're going to see that's like, I have a lot of shirts. And she tells me I need to get rid of. I've got too many shirts in my closet. She's like, which one are you going to get rid of? I was like, I want them all, right? So they just stay there. But there is something to be said about that. Where is my value at in that? I don't know. Maybe there's a little part of me that's bent towards appearance. Maybe that's where part of my treasure is. Maybe that's where my value is. I mean, we don't need to like psychoanalyze me, but I just want to say, if you look at it, that if you follow the money, it maps your heart. Even with everything going on with COVID and how they're reopening up all the schools, all of us as parents are trying to figure out how we deal with this new reality and get our kids in school. And so one of the things, they have to be all distance and they need to have computers, and they're going to be sitting at a computer and working, and that's kind of what school's going to look like across a lot of the districts. And Grace doesn't, my daughter Grace doesn't have her own like laptop because she's a little bit young. And so Eileen was saying, well, I think we could have her use one of these older ones. And I was like, no, let's get her a new one. You know, because there is part of my heart, part of what I really value are my kids. I'm not going to buy a bunch of technology maybe or stuff for me, but I might buy more for them. So when I follow the money, when I map my heart, I see maybe it's spent on appearance, maybe it's spent on my kids. Those are the things that I really value. Those are the things I can really value. But money maps your heart, whether you like it or not. Maybe those aren't your examples. Think of your own. Tell somebody or don't, your call. But money maps your heart. And then Jesus keeps moving, and he says something that was really hard for me to get. And I'll read it to you, and I think maybe you'll see why. He says this, right? Because so far, he says, don't store up treasures on earth, but store up treasures on heaven. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's all about treasure. It's all about money. It makes sense. Then he says this, the eye is the lamp of the body. Oh, okay, Jesus. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. Got it. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? What? Talking about money, eyes, money. You know, like, I wanted to assure you that Jesus isn't having a squirrel moment here. He's too much of a genius. He doesn't do that. It's like, hey, sidebar, track eyes, okay, back to money. Like, no, it's not that. This is absolutely about that. And so I want you to imagine something as we're looking at this, because I think what Jesus is saying, this will help explain it. Imagine you're in a room and it's really well lit. If your eyes work properly, it's well lit, you're going to see really, really clearly. You're going to be able to traverse the room. It's going to work out well for you. However, if a room is really well lit and your eyes aren't working for whatever reason, then they are dark, they are blinded. And no matter how well lit the room is, you won't be able to see clearly. And I think what Jesus is trying to get us to understand is that's what money does. Money has a tremendous ability to blind us to its influence. It's really subtle. Think about it for a moment. It's really, think about the subtlety for a little bit. All of us make lifestyle choices. Typically, the more money we make, the more micro upgrades we make to our lifestyle. I think about the first car I ever got in high school. I had no money. It was a 1995 Mitsubishi Galant, called the Millennium Falcon. She may not look like much kid, but she's got it where it counts. So, but this car, I drove it in Phoenix. It had no air conditioning. It's terrible. And it sounded like it was being propelled by hamsters. And that was the way this vehicle ran. It was my first vehicle, but the more money I've got, the older I've got, the better vehicles I've been able to invest in. I'm not aware of it. I just do it because money is a subtle influencer. We make more money, we get nicer stuff. And have you ever had the thought, it's hard to imagine how we survived on less when now doesn't feel like enough? It's hard to imagine how we survived on less when now doesn't feel like enough. We make decisions, and that progression of those decisions that we made then versus now, there is a mindset that can shift, but we don't always see it because money is subtle. Money can blind. It just does. It has that innate ability. We may not see ourselves as wealthy. Few people look at their bank accounts and determine, I have too much money. I just have way too much money. Maybe one person does that. I don't know, right? But not many people do that. Randy shared about a month ago in our Inside Out series talking about greed, and he just talked about going through the store and seeing all those empty shelves. It's in the context of all those empty shelves that he says, when we see those empty shelves and we see people grabbing a bunch of stuff, in them it's greed, but in us, it's responsibility. All you have to do is see someone that's a little more worried about money or a little more consumed with it. And we judge from the outside, right? All we do is we see someone who's a little bit further along, a little more stuck in it, and we're like, well, that's them, but we're good. Man, it's blinding. It's blinding. It makes us compare. Wealth and money have a subtle influence. And then Jesus says something, closes this out with something bold, which he can do. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Really? Are you sure? Can't I just hold it all? Right? Can I just love them the same? Jesus is saying it's not possible. Wait, but I can have Jesus and I can have money, and no one's saying you can't. But what Jesus is saying is that you can't have both equally. You can't serve both. You can't have it all. You can't hold it all together like a hug. What Jesus is saying is here, by default, whenever you turn to face something, you turn your back on the other thing. So you can't serve both God and money. You're going to either look God face to face and be like, I'm in, and turn your back on that, or do that to money and turn your back on God. You just can't have it both ways. And I think this is the third reality that Jesus is trying to get us to see, is that money can be a master. Money's temporary. Money maps your heart. Money can be a master. And what makes it easier for it to master us is the fact that it blinds us first. I told you about the camping trip. One of the things we did on this camping trip, was we went fishing, which I'm really bad at. I caught something actually, but that was the first time in my adult life, and it wasn't impressive. But one of the things we did is we threw out this crawfish trap, which looks a little bit like this. And so we threw this crawfish trap in, and the way it works is you put this really smelly bait right in the middle, and there are these holes on either side. The crawfish, they come into the holes to go after the bait, and they're like, we're just crawfish, we don't know how to get out. And they get stuck. And then you leave it sit there for a while, and then you pull it out, and then you've got all this crawfish, right? That's the way it's supposed to work, and you can have a boil if you want to. Or in this case, I just wanted my kids to see what crawfish look like, because I thought they'd think that's fun. So I did that. As I pull the trap out, there's all these crawfish, but there's one little guy hanging on to the outside of the cage. This dude's not even trapped. Worst crawfish ever. He's just hanging on to the outside of the cage. He could have let go at any time because I'm about to pull him out and take him someplace he doesn't want to be. In a bucket, so my 2-year-old can play with him. You know what I mean? He's not going to like it. But he's still holding on the outside of the cage, and I think money makes us do the same thing. Money will take us to a place we don't want to be. We have no intention of going. We don't want to go, but we just can't let go. That's what happens when we're going to store up stuff in heaven, or store up stuff on earth, when we refuse to loosen our grip. Money can be a master that takes us to places we don't want to go. Nobody likes, when we talk about money being a master, nobody likes that concept. No one wants to be, in our culture, no one wants to be mastered by anything. It's unattractive. All I mean to say is when you do things you don't want to do, or you do things you never planned to do, and sacrifice in order to do those things, I think, my friends, that's mastery. I think that's what that is. It's a natural default state. Because when the Bible talks about what our natural default state is, it says that each of us are motivated by desires, that we go after the things we want to go after. And what money does is it allows us to go after those things. So money, just its natural default state is to take control, is to master us. It causes character to be tested. It causes compromises to be made. Who have you known that do things they thought they'd never do in order to make money? Let me ask you some questions, and you just think about them. Be introspective and reflective. What does your consumer debt look like? Consumer debt represents appetite. What does that look like? John D. Rockefeller, at the height of his wealth, was asked, how much money is enough money? To which he responded, just a little bit more. See, satisfaction is a heart thing, not a number. What does your consumer debt look like? Have you ever spent more than you realized? How easy is it to pivot your budget? Do you have a budget? How easy is it to pivot it, move it around? Do you have a budget? And I'll just say, if you don't have a budget, let me share with you something. I was broke, now I'm not. It's a financial learning experience, and I just want to say it is a great way to begin to learn how to build that budget. It's a cool way. And all I mean to say is if you don't have that, without a budget, it's easy for money to get in there and just subtly influence. You don't even know it's happening. You don't even know where your money's going. I'm not knocking anybody. I'm not condemning anybody. I'm just saying, hey, this might be the most practical and spiritual thing you do today. And that's cool. I'm great with that. How easy is it to pivot your budget? I think money can be a master. It can get you into a career that makes you permanently unhappy. And you wake up 25 years later and be like, why am I here? Oh, I'm miserable. It's the money. It can get you into a career that makes you permanently unhappy. Jesus shows us these realities that money is temporary. Right? Money is temporary. Money maps your heart, and money can be a master, and he lays it all out like this because he's flipping everything. Everything we're told will satisfy, Jesus said, will ultimately disappoint. But you don't have to be mastered by it. You escape from its control when you invest in heaven, when you store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. When we treasure the temporary, it comes with a trap. But when we treasure the eternal, that's where true freedom is. That's where the shackles are unlocked. That's where the mastery that money has in our lives is gone. I said we come back to Matthew 6:20, where we talked about storing up treasures in your heaven. Let's go there right now. Jesus says, but store up for yourselves, this is the antidote, for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. This is inherently better. Because the thing is, we said where your treasure is, there your heart is. Now that can be you can map it, and that can be a really frustrating or scary thing or convicting thing. But if you don't like where your heart is at, the principle works the other way too. If you move your treasure, you can move your heart. And when you store up treasures in heaven, you move your heart to the heart of God. And that is a safer place because you and I, we look at our world. All you got to do is turn on social media and realize like, oh, everything's chaos and I'm in control of nothing. But God is on the throne and he is in control of all things. When we will do this, then we'll replace that panic that we feel with peace that comes from Christ. So let's close it down. Let's talk about some practical next steps. What to do. Here it is. For your consideration. You don't have to do anything, but this is for you to consider. 3 keys to unlock the shackles of money's mastery in your life. Here it is. First, map your heart. Map your heart. Get clarity. What I mean by this is evaluate, look at your budget, but do this. Compare your budget with account statements. Does your plan match reality? Does your heart reflect where you want it to be or where you think it is? That's not a condemning thing, but you want to start. Take the curtain off. Look at it. Shine the light on it. Map your heart. And I would say combine this with the prayer of search my heart. Just like Reed was teaching us last week. Combine it with the prayer of search my heart, Lord. And you will. Once you do that, then begins the process of realignment. Create a budget that reflects eternal values. Invest. Make a decision. This is a heart thing. Invest where the heart of God is. Let his mission become your investment. When the things that break the heart of the living God become the target for your resources, you are free. And there's life there. And you're storing up for yourself treasures in heaven. And when that happens, the last thing we get to do is enjoy peace, because we have investments that never depreciate. They don't depreciate. Their moths and vermin don't break it. Nobody steals it. It can't go anywhere when we put it in the hands of the living God who is ultimately in control. Now, these might be interesting. They might be helpful, but they're not the full picture, actually. These are things you can do, but none of these are possible. None of these are possible until Jesus is your treasure. And if I could leave you with one salient thing, the most important thing, the thing that is the heart of it all, it's this: treasure Jesus more than anything money can buy. Treasure Jesus more than anything you can get. Treasure Jesus more than all the stuff you can accumulate. Treasure Jesus more than anything. And I'd be like, you could look at that and be like, well, the humble will look at that and be like, I don't. What I mean is treasure him. Go after him. Love him. Be amazed by him. Be awed at the joy of seeing him. And don't experience guilt, shame, or condemnation. That's not from God. That's from the evil one. All I mean to say is this is a spiritual journey. My hope, my heart, is that I treasure Jesus more 20 years from now than I do now. And on my deathbed more than I did in my 40s. That's all. I'm not knocking anyone around. I'm just saying. Treasure Jesus more than anything money can buy. Go after that. Head in that direction. Take a next step. Because what Jesus knows is that his love is the only currency that isn't devalued, that isn't impacted by inflation. If you want to treasure, and here's how I think, if you want to treasure Jesus, because he's the only thing that unlocks everything else, if you want to treasure Jesus, you got to first see how much he loved you, how he made you his treasure. Think about what he left in heaven. There's like descriptors of what heaven's like, and there's streets of gold, and there's jewels in the building, and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know. It's cooler than my street. That's all I know. And heaven is this amazing place, and Jesus is on the throne of it all. And he left that and came to earth. And when he came to earth, he could have been good looking. He could have been impressive. He could have had a great job, had a big family, been really successful. And that's not even how he came to earth. He came into a manger, food trough for animals in a barn. And when presented at the temple, his parents offered 2 pigeons, they offered 2 pigeons, an offering reserved for the most poor families under the law. They were poor. During his ministry, he was homeless. And when he invited people to follow him, he said, just so you know, I'm homeless. It's not a great selling point. He was homeless during his ministry, and the day he died, the day he was crucified, the Roman soldiers took his only real possession, his clothes, and they ripped them to pieces in front of him. And then when he died and they took him off, they put him in a tomb that he could not afford, that he did not own. He had nothing. He left heaven for that? Why? Because you and I were the treasure he was imagining. Because we were worth it. When you see Jesus made you his treasure, that will lead you to make him your treasure. And when that happens, I'm just telling you, money's just money. Money's a tool. It's to be invested. It's to be used. But you have all you ever need in Christ, and you are free. When we look at all of Jesus' teaches and all the Sermon on the Mount and this thing, see, I want you to understand Jesus is not looking for donors for his causes. He is looking for disciples in his kingdom. It's all about the heart. That's what Jesus wants. Treasure Jesus more than anything money can buy. So I just want to leave you. Are you ready to go all in? Are you ready to be about that? Because Jesus is making an invitation. He puts it on the table. Money can be a master. Money can be your master, or he can be. And when you surrender to him, you find he is the treasure that ultimately satisfies and will never disappoint. Let's pray together. Father, You know each of us has a next step. All of us have a past. Each of us has a next step. You know what all these things look like, what our circumstances look like, where we're at, where our hearts are. Father, and I pray that as we have the time and place with you this week, as we look at taking whatever of those next steps we really need to take, whatever you're calling us to, I pray that you'd shine light on it. You would help us to do the things that would please you. You would help us to realign. And maybe it starts with budgets and maybe it starts with hearts, and I don't know. For each person, it's different. You want us to be free. You want us to be satisfied in you. You are sufficient. You are enough. Thank you for being that way. Thank you for making it so. There is no one like you, and Jesus, you are so good. And it's in your name we pray these things together. Amen.